Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to NPU Live. I'm Keri Rodriguez.
And I'm Tim Langen.
Today is Wednesday. It is May 27th, 2020, coming to you live from Boston, Massachusetts, is our national broadcast where we are reaching out to all of our affiliate organization parents across the country to have this conversation every single morning about getting through the pandemic. Here we are in week 11.
That's right.
Still getting through it as we wrap up the school year, whatever that means.
Yeah, I feel like we're staggering right toward the end of it.
And a lot of parents very anxious about, what to do with kids, getting through the summer. Things are heating up.
That's right.
Things are heating up politically. Donald Trump acting a fool.
Socially, we will get to that.
Education policy experts making big decisions without parents at the table.
Don't do that.
Not a good idea. Not a good look for you. So a lot to discuss today. I'm very excited about our guest, always Mira Brown from Prepared Parents, bringing us her experience and her tips to get us through the day. And then Renee Wilkinson, who is from School Facts Boston, a friend of ours.
That's right.
Friends of Massachusetts Parents United, our home organization here in Massachusetts. Very excited to talk to her. Lots of interesting conversation here in the Commonwealth, very similar to conversations happening across the country.
That's right.
About reopening. And, what's happening in Boston, not that different from what's happening in urban areas all over the place. We've got school buildings falling down, and we can't seem to have some sanitary conditions for our kids pre-COVID, but now we're supposed to trust that they got this covered.
They can make the water run.
Been underperforming for our kids for years, and can't have running bathrooms in the best of times without a deadly virus. But now we're gonna reopen. Right. Interesting to talk to Renee about her lens and how she sees it as a parent in Boston. I don't know if you're picking up on this, Tim. I have a particular lens on.
I'm picking up on that lens. Yes. Can we talk to Renee about it? That's right.
That's right. A lot to get to before that.
Absolutely.
Tim, you gotta just jump into.
You sure? I'm just gonna cut you off. I'm just gonna shut it down. So COVID cases, 1.72 million cases now confirmed in the U.S. and hitting 100,000 deaths.
And those are people we have been able to test.
That's right. And those are confirmed deaths, 100,000. At the same time, and saying this without any sarcasm, in President Trump news, while discussing a plan that would reduce the cost of insulin for people on Medicare, President Trump said, "I don't use insulin. Should I be? I never thought about it. I know a lot of people are very badly affected, right? Unbelievable." I'm not a doctor, but I'm just going to put this out there. Nor is he. In no way, if you are not diabetic, please do not use insulin. That's my medical advice.
For a whole host of reasons, including the fact that people who actually could use insulin have a hard time getting it. It's very expensive. I know actually several people who have passed away because they were not able to actually afford insulin because it is very expensive to obtain. They've rationed it. They've gotten very sick. What to say about this, Tim?
I don't think anything needs to be said. I think he said it all. What I think we need to talk about is what's going on in the country that's taking COVID really off, or should be taking COVID off the front page, or at least sharing the spotlight, because this is something I'm not seeing at the top of the news wire for CNN or any other news feed, and this bothers me, is what's going on socially in this country around race. And we've had 2 incidents this week that, not that it went away, like you always say, a pandemic does not take away racism, but we've had 2 incidences, the Christian, no relation to Amy Cooper, the Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper incident on the Ramble in Central Park. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the horrible murder of George Floyd by 4 police officers in Minneapolis.
What was really stunning, and you are seeing this in the news, somewhat covered, not to the degree that it should be covered, but the outrage from the community, which was happening last night, by virtue of this incredible network, the National Parents Union. We had a front row seat because our delegates, our parent organizations, the community activists that make up this organization are on the front lines, and they're out there protesting. And frankly, Our friends from the Minnesota Parent Union, Kulia Pringle, who is one of our National Parents Council members, our leadership body of this organization, out on the front lines. I mean, the only reason why 4 police officers were actually fired yesterday is because 3 of them, or the only reason why 3 out of 4 of them were actually fired yesterday is because the community had fought to ensure that if you are a police officer witnessing police brutality and you do not step in and stop a fellow officer from doing so, you too can be fired, which is why 3 out of the 4 were fired. A 4th fired because they actually killed George Floyd in front of all of us, George Floyd rather, in front of all of us. You know, this is a guy who is being picked up and arrested on suspicion of forgery, which in this country, by the way, is not a crime that is punishable by death. And police, again, not judges, not juries,
Nope.
you know, just there to arrest him. We don't even know what the full circumstances. All you can do is see this poor man on the floor with a cop, his knee on his neck. He is dying in front of it, and it's just excruciating.
For 7 minutes.
And frankly, you know, a lot of folks asking us today, and I can hear them, and I will not be sharing this video because, you know, this kind of tragedy porn, as some folks are referring to it, it's very traumatizing for communities of color, for people of color to have to see this incident over and over and over and over again. You know, we know what happened. It's not a surprise for communities of color to see and witness this. It's not a surprise to hear that this has happened. This is not news to communities of color, and it's traumatizing. So I know that a lot of, you know, well-intentioned white folks are sharing it. It is traumatizing for families of color. So if folks ask you to stop, perhaps not share it anymore, please listen. Let people of color lead this conversation on how they need to get through it. But really proud of Kulia Pringle, of our folks in Minneapolis who are have no fear, and they're jumping into the fray, into the conversation, fighting for their community, fighting for our children, fighting to keep our families safe. You know, it's a disgusting situation. And again, you know, we had quite a long conversation yesterday about the situation in Central Park, the weaponizing of 911, the weaponizing of police by white women. Yesterday was the conversation that we had. And, you know, what is interesting, you know, as these incidents kind of stand side by side, what Amy Cooper did, you know, I think this actually brings this entire situation to a head, because what Amy Cooper was doing, you know, we kind of saw the end result happen in Minneapolis.
Right.
You know, she was calling the police in the hopes that they would do this to Christian Cooper in Central Park, because that's what would happen. Because that, again, as we talked about yesterday, the weaponizing of police, that unfortunately is the end result. That's what happens when you call the cops on Black and brown folks. Very interesting perspective, Bernita Bradley today bringing this up about the fact that, you know, when these things happen, what this ends up doing is keeping, you know, Black and brown folks, people of color, communities of color from having any kind of relationship with police. She was talking about the fact that she in the past may have used 911 if she thought somebody was in trouble. You know, they were screaming in her name. Now she doesn't call 911 at all. There have been situations where she's called because something was happening in the neighborhood that she thought she needed assistance from the police. She did so anonymously, and the police would come banging on her door. In a very violent and kind of aggressive way, in a way that they would never do to a person in a white community or a white person. And so what it does is that it perpetuates the cycle. You know, there's never any restorative justice with communities that have been harmed. There's never a real conversation. You know, unfortunately, this kind of feels like, you know, these school shootings we see where, oh, you know, in the moments when it happens, everybody's in an uproar, and then we tend to get amnesia about 2 weeks out, and then suddenly we're back waiting for the next incident to happen. folks like Kulia Pringle, the Minnesota Parents Union, the parents in that community are standing up saying, we don't want to lose our children anymore. This is not acceptable in our community. They're continuing to fight. And it's only through that community organizing that we saw 3 out of the 4 of those police officers fired yesterday. But I don't know, Tim, how do you see this? You get fired when you kill someone? You don't get thrown in jail?
Well, I think what hopefully will happen afterwards is that charges will be pressed.
But again, too often, what we see is this stuff goes to the grand jury, and then, they end up fired. Who knows? They get picked up by another police department. We've seen that before. When is it going to end? That is really what families are crying out for right now in this moment. So we want to send our love and our support, and just so inspired by the work of Kulia and her leadership in her community, and the folks in Minneapolis who are standing up and fighting and making sure their voices are heard. This work of advocating for parents and children and families is multifaceted, and you've got to be quick on your feet. We're trying to fight a pandemic, but as we say on this program, racism has not taken a break.
That's right.
During the pandemic, and unfortunately, we're fighting on all fronts for our babies. So. Well,
I look forward to speaking to Kulia on Friday.
That's right. She's going to join us on Friday, and we'll get her perspective directly. Poor thing. She is emotionally, spiritually, and physically exhausted right now, but we'll have her on Friday to kind of talk about her firsthand experiences with what's going on there, what she's seeing in her community, how she's organizing, and how families are standing up and pushing back and fighting for justice there. So excited to have her join us.
That's great. And we have a lot coming up in the next week. This upcoming Monday, actually, we'll have the Global Day of Parents with our friends from Parents Forum again. Eve and Jamal will be doing another workshop throughout the day, talking about how families can manage stress during this time, and offering a workshop, on emotional awareness. And also tune into all the shows we have this week. Today is Wednesday, 4 p.m. You're gonna have Looped In with Maritza Gertie. Looking forward to that one. Love her at 6 p.m.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about the census.
I have a feeling.
Be counted.
I filled mine out. The Parent Effect with Kelly Williams-Ballar is on at 6. Tomorrow, we have a great guest. Robert Hendricks is going to be on tomorrow.
From He Is Me, and that's a great organization.
That's right.
Fighting to keep Black men in the classroom.
That's right. And then tomorrow, of course, at 4 p.m. is Dad to Dad.
That's right. Don't miss Dad to Dad. I'm so excited about new developments with Dad to Dad. What are you talking about this week? Will you tell us tomorrow?
I'll tell you tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm not going to spoil it. Gonna lead you.
Very excited about next week too, because we're going to be joined by a special guest on Monday. And Natasha, our producer, doesn't even know about this because this is kind of in the works right now. A friend of ours, Sabrina Madison, is joining us on Monday.
On Monday, okay, great.
And she is actually a parent advocate up in Buffalo, New York, where the Board of Regents is actually talking about making charter schools, and the Board of Regents in New York are the authorizers who decide, whether charter schools can happen and if they're doing a good job and all of these things. But, some really controversial comments coming out of New York, where you have, again, some of the most highest performing charter schools, kind of making charter schools the second class of schools in the state of New York.
That's interesting.
The National Parents Union, we don't really care about governance models. A lot of people get very exercised about like what kind of public school, and it's really more about politics than it is for outcomes for children. So you want to call it a district school, a charter school, a pilot school, whatever you want to call it. We don't care. We care about the outcomes and what the school is actually doing for our children. But charter schools, especially in New York, have had some incredibly promising results. They're actually talking about shutting down the highest performing charter school in Buffalo,
really,
because of the fact that funding is tight. So instead of finding a way to fund schools that are working for kids, we're going to shut this one down because it's not the right governance model. We'll talk to Sabrina because she is leading the fight. She's a parent, and she's pretty fired up. So we're going to talk to her on Monday. Excited about that.
Well, great. We'll have Sabrina, and we'll have Parents Forum around that too. That'll be a busy day on Monday. And you know what I need? I need some help because, like you said, summer's coming. going to be losing our online resources. I
Mhm.
need some advice. I need some Mira Brown.
That's right. Mira, she is joining us from Austin, Texas, our friend from Prepared Parents. And you can sign up for her tips and get them directly in your box every single morning, your email box, by going to preparedforsuccess.org or preparedparents.org. Mira, good morning. How are you?
I am good. It is sunny today. I don't know if you can see Austin outside my window.
Austin has been so rainy the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we've had a lot of summer showers come through. And so it's been a lot of indoor activities. And if you have kids who are with anxiety, who get very worried about thunderstorms, you end up inside even before like one dark cloud starts coming and all of a sudden, oh my God, the storm is coming, and inside we go. And like 2 hours later it comes.
Any better day to day where like, hey, buddy, remember yesterday we had thunderstorms and nothing really happened. It was okay. So likely it'd probably be okay today, right? What do you think, buddy? Nope, not so good.
I've tried it all. So instead, and now he has his 2-year-old who like just copies him, right? And so his 2-year-old brother now is just like, thunder, loud thunder inside. I'm like, no, because in Texas, like this is summer, right? And in New York growing up, I remember too, you'd have summer thunderstorms just like come through and then they pass, right? And the sun comes back out and you go back outside type of, sometimes you never even went inside. My parents had no idea where we were. We were like running around the neighborhood, like.
It's scary for kids. A lot of noise.
It can be. It totally can. Anyway, things are good. We have 2 more days of school, today and tomorrow. And it is done.
Flying solo, Mira, after that. No more mandatory Zooms, no more worksheets to fill out. It's all you, Mama.
It is. And in some ways, I think it's easier because I can focus on what I know what I know the kids love, or right. And I can like really think about going for, I don't know, a scavenger hunt outside looking for roly-polies or what, whatever it might be. But it's like when we start every morning with, hey buddy, we can get on that Zoom, it just automatically sets sets the morning, and it just spirals from there. Easier and harder.
Well, as we kind of wind down the year, here we've got about 2 more weeks. June 15th is
Yep.
At least, in this neck of the woods. We've got a couple more weeks, but we're thinking about winding down. You are winding down this week. So,
Yeah.
how do we get ready for this? How do we get prepared?
So this household is in full, like, end of school year activity. So I have the reminder emails from his teachers to take the ELA and math assessments before, the school year is over. I'm still working on my sort of parent teacher letter that I'm writing, and my reflections, and to sort of both reflect and honor and my kid, Gabriel, and everything we've done. We have his last Zooms and the goodbyes. We even have, it's actually quite smart. I hadn't thought about this, but our school district is by your last name scheduling when you can like drive through, mask, and they like throw your kid's stuff in the car type of thing to like clean up the.
Okay. Like, doing that too. We'll be picking up their stuff.
Picking up, just like full on getting ready for, and
saxophone. We'll be doing that.
Saxophone?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We have a saxophone player in the house, and we will be dropping that saxophone off.
You can't wait, can you?
Ooh.
I picked saxophone in 6th grade, and my parents were like, never again.
So I'm a drummer and a cellist, and I sang and did a whole bunch of stuff when I was in high school. My ex-husband was a professional like saxophone player for a long time. So we have all these big dreams that like we're gonna have little musician babies. And so the saxophone I think lasted, I want to say 2 months, and it's been sitting in the closet for a while, and I've been itching to move it along because it makes me very nervous with all these little boys because I've seen it out. I've seen things, Legos stuck in it, and I personally just don't want to be responsible for it anymore.
Good call.
So yeah, that's how I'm feeling.
Dropped off, things given back to, things given back to us. Anyway, to your point, right? Like just full on, end it and all of this. And interestingly, I was so busy like making the list and trying to enter emails from teachers and making, and all of that it didn't even occur to me to sit down with Gabriel and say like, hey buddy, you're ending the school year. Like this was your kindergarten year. It was actually a relatively tough year for him. Like we've been through a lot together this year. Like, how do you want to end the year strong? Because I know he's hit his wall. Like I can see it. I mean, we both have, like we can see it on each other's faces. But we're all across the country in some variation, right, of the end of school year. And we all have probably hit our wall in some way. And so I'm a runner, and I really, this sort of second wind analogy really works for me. And there's a lot of research behind that on how we can do this sort of academically that I wanted to talk about. And what I mean by that is, as for any other runners out there, right, you've been running. I was a long distance cross country runner in high school and college and stuff. And you've been going a long time and you were just flat out, you can feel your body wanting to collapse. Like you're flat out exhausted. And then all of a sudden it's like your body snaps into it and your breathing becomes less labored, right? You sort of have all of it, like all of a sudden your body has this confidence, right? Like I can do it. We got this, runner's high or whatever you want to call it. And you're even running faster and stronger. So like, how do we help ourselves, quite frankly, because this is as much about us also, and our kids sort of get that second wind and new level of energy to end the school year strong? And the truth of the matter is, I don't know if you guys are experiencing this, but there doesn't really feel like that much of a difference between the end of this school year and the beginning of next school year. It just feels like it's all blurring and blending together because of all the unknowns and the uncertainty. And is it really ending? Are we continuing into the summer? Is there like programming we're supposed to be doing to, like, what does next year look like? Are we just home again, right? And so it just feels like it's even more important knowing that to figure out, right, how we can feel good about ending this year. So here's a couple of things we can do as parents. The first is to actually sit down, unlike what I didn't do, which I will be doing today with Gabriel, and have essentially like a parent-kid conference, like sit down with each other for an end of year meeting. And the thing that we can be is a mirror back to our kids about what we have seen, and then give them a voice, right? Give them a language, give them a voice, and some sort of agency and and self-direction in what they want for the end of this school year, right? This is their school year. And so, what should they be proud of? What are you proud of that you've seen in your kids? What have they really enjoyed doing or learning? What are they still struggling with? Like, what's still challenging? And sometimes a lot of that actually, like some of our teachers have emailed and asked us for some of this information so that they can have it, which I've really appreciated. So it's a good way to gain that as well. The next thing I would say is, based on that conversation, set a goal, one goal, two goals. I mean, it really depends on how old your kids are. Like little kids, probably fewer goals. List the priorities, make a plan with your kids. Like, if nothing else, we've said this for the last couple of months, like the process of setting goals and learning that skill set is so critical for our kids. And honestly, it's one of the most successful, that and reflection are some of the most successful habits we can sort of impart on or instill and nurture in our kids. If they're bigger tasks, just like break them up into smaller chunks. Here's the thing I think as parents to know that is really helpful to me and sort of helped with some of my anxiety, which is that every piece of learning science will tell you that pretty much any student can master any material, right? They really can at their own speed, at their own pace, right? And so that's where some goal setting even more so, because I'll hear a lot like, I can't do it, or I'm never going to know this. And it's like, that's not true. Like, you can do this. You are going to know this. You're just going to learn it in a way that makes sense for you and how you learn at your own speed. So let's figure out what that is. I just did this with my niece. She came over to play video games. she did not know what she was getting herself into. She's come over a lot less lately, but because of this. And she was just talking to me and how she had 8 assignments in English language arts, they call it ELI, right? 8 assignments due. School ends tomorrow, right? Like grading is done by Friday. I'm like, that's a lot of assignments. This is last week, but like, that's a lot of assignments even in 1 week for a 10-year-old. And so I made her like sit down with me and we mapped out like, great, like how long does it take you to do each one, right? How do we get 25% of the, let's break it into chunks. How do we get 25% of the way there? Like, what do you feel like you can do on your own? What do you need, right? And she actually like felt better because she had a plan, right? She felt like, oh, okay, this doesn't feel like this overwhelming task anymore. And underneath all of that, it really unearthed this like insecurity of, I'm not good enough, or I don't know how to do this, or because ELA is something that feels harder and more overwhelming to her than math. She can do that for herself for math, right? So figuring that out with your own kids and giving them, and then like I was celebrating with her, right? And even in Gabriel of just making the feeling of making progress in the small wins is so important for our kids and ourselves to stay motivated, right? And so breaking it into those 25% chunks, for example, and then celebrating every time. And we made like a huge deal every time she'd come into our house. For everyone out there, they live next door, but every time she'd come into our house, like she'd be like, I did it. And it would be like this big thing we'd all get, right? Just to make her feel like that's motivation, those small wins, those chunks and throughout. And the last 2 I would say, and this came from Gabriel being a little upset with me, but is build a portfolio, right? So we've been home with our kids, and this is different for older, can look different for older and younger kids, but like collect the stuff our kids have done, pull together the projects and the stories and the drawings, right? Like that's their portfolio, that's their work. In fairness, I was in another one of my anxiety-ridden cleaning sprees. I have a little OCD when it comes to organization and cleaning, and Gabriel saw me and he was like, that's my stuff. And I was like, you don't need, I mean, you don't, of course I'm thinking like kindergarten drawing, like really. And he was like, no, that's my, and it made me real, no, like that's motivating, right? To kids and to adults to see their accomplishments, see that work. And every single one of those pieces means something to them. And Gabriel asked if I would actually not throw it away and make it into one of those photo books. And I was like, smart kid.
That is a little bit helpful for that, because with 3 kids and so much art and so many important papers, what we've kind of done is, can we take a picture of it? Can we take a picture?
Exactly.
So we'll have it, but we would be drowning because, oh my God, they bring home
So much stuff, right?
I have it all. I have a big bucket. I have a big bin, huge tub.
That's why there's a part of me who's like, can we not do the drive-through at the school where they throw all the stuff in our car because it's just more paper that's coming into my house?
I am getting pickier for what I save though. Like I used to save every little line drawn on a piece of paper.
Mhm.
Now I toss that stuff.
So how do you decide what you keep and what you toss?
Is that art or is that like just a little squiggly
line?
Like they're 7 and 9 now.
Mhm.
If it's a little squiggly line, it's just a squiggly line. They're not trying to express themselves.
Mm.
If there's arms and some legs, I'll keep that.
I think what's helpful, there's some arms and some legs. That's
Also,
a fair distinction.
he can fill an entire room.
Maybe I will.
We used to have we hung like a string or like a wire or something in Gabriel's room, and we would with little pins, and he could decide like what, and for periods of times, this was like when he was in preschool, right? Things would go up there, and then when he was done, they would come down. And now his room is and I just like push the stuff with my, I kick the stuff with my leg, and I close the door, and I'm like, OCD mommy's not going to take a look at that, but point being that portfolio, it can actually be very motivating to kids and actually really give them that second win we're talking about, to see how much they have done, and they find pride in all of that work, and can find pride, and that can be the thing that galvanizes. And holding it for next year, again, there's a lot of uncertainty in what next year looks like, but having that to say, this is what I accomplished as a student, to give to your teacher, I think is well worth it also. And the last 2 things are for older kids. We've talked about this a bit, but one way to sort of end the year strong also is to document, write, create a living history, write a story about this experience. Again, we don't know what next year is going to look like. And this is unprecedented, unforgettable moment. And that reflection, that ability to sit down for kids is super important way, I think, to sort of close a chapter on this spring semester. So that's something else that they can do. So a couple of different ways that parents pick one. I'm picking one out of all of those as a way to end the year, get a little bit of a second wind, feel good about it. And then guess what? Now we can start planning for summer. That's coming next.
The biggest one is having a schedule. That makes all the difference. When my kids can expect what's going to happen, especially on the weekends, that's when they're at their craziest because they don't have that school structure. But when I can give them some kind of schedule, like, well, back in the before times, like we would always get up and we'll go to the gym and then we'll go to the park, and they expected that. That was a
so
big
now we're going to work on a new schedule
Yes.
for what it's going to look like, so that they know. Because like one of the things, it was very interesting talking to his oldest Max when this was first happening. What he was missing was like knowing that, on this day we do this and this is the order of the day. My Miles was missing, I like that Tuesday is art day and Wednesday is gym and Thursday is computer day, and we look forward to that. And like that makes sense to them. So finding ways to do that so that you still have those themes, on different days, even in the summertime, gives them something to look for.
Definitely.
Well, kids still like to know, developmentally, kids are still in a place where they want to know what's expected of them, right? And what their routine is and what's happening next. I mean, everyone is different, certainly, but developmentally, as kids, surprises are not, they're not developmentally ready, if that makes sense, right? And so that's why routines are even more important, to your point, to know what's expected of me, what's happening next. And certainly some more than others, but yes, like that is hugely important, which is why sometimes you see kids in the summer sort of aimless, like what, and so it's important. And we'll have some tips coming up on, and we have an activity you can download from this tip, and we're going to expound on it for next week or the week after, around just sort of how do you start thinking about some things that you can be doing, no matter what to figure out what you can control and what you can do with your kids to minimize some of the learning loss that we know always happens, COVID or not, but especially this year, and sort of inspire our kids over the summer. So that is coming. And then one last thing I wanted to say before you guys move on is next week we are, to your conversation, hard conversation, but really important one. We've been consumed by COVID, but next week our newsletter will be dedicated to sort of research-based, and we'd love to talk to you guys about this, sort of tips on how parents can talk to their kids about race and differences. Only 10% of parents do. And if we don't talk to our kids, as you guys know, about race, they don't know the differences are normal. And so how do we do that for all age groups? What does that look like? And so we're going to get back to that next week. And so we'll share that out as well.
I think that's so. Unfortunately, by mistake, parents of color have to have very important conversations with their kids. But white families, if we are going to disrupt racism in our society, we need white families to also have conversations.
We have to do it too. 100%.
We don't see color, like that's not the conversation. So we're going to better equip you to have more effective, more impactful, and really critical conversations with kids. We're so excited that Prepared Parents is taking this on. We're going to use their tips and some other tips and tricks from parent activists across the country. So we're excited to jump into that work as well. So we love having you with us, and we'll talk to you again next week, Mira.
Tomorrow, and then next week.
Tomorrow too.
Tomorrow. I was like, wait, today's Wednesday, right? Don't get my.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place.
Okay. But I will see you tomorrow, and then I will see you next week. So
wonderful.
Thank you all.
Now joining us live from Prepared Parents, preparedforsuccess.org or preparedparents.org. You can sign up for her tips.
All right, takes 10 seconds.
And again, I know those were a lot of tips, but as Mira, I want to make sure that folks hear me when we say this. Just do one. Just do a piece. Do half of one.
Do the best you can.
Sit down and have a conversation with your kid. talk to them about how their day is going. Mattering is critically important.
Right.
That's always really important. And then, if you've got 20 minutes and you can read, that's always good too. All of
Give it a try.
these tips are suggestive. If you can get to it, mom and dad, you got it. All right. Very excited about our next guest, who is joining us from Boston. A friend of ours, our organizations have partnered through the Massachusetts Educational Equity Partnership, and certainly a lot to talk about when we talk about Boston Public Schools and urban education across the country. Really excited to welcome Vernee Wilkinson from School Facts Boston to our broadcast on the National Parents Union. Vernee, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can. So excited to have you with us this morning. And
thank you for having me.
As is our tradition, we've got a lot of serious stuff to talk about. And, you and I both have some firsthand experience with the Boston Public Schools and what's happening and all the conversations. But first and foremost, easy for me to say, how are you doing through this pandemic? How is your family? How are your babies? How is life going for you right now? How are you making it through?
Yeah, how are you doing? A friend and I have been, that we've been checking in on each other. It's kind of been like, what are the feelings right now? What are the feelings today? Because how are you doing? Seems like a harder question to answer than it used to be a few months ago. But yeah, the kids are doing fine. Our daughter's 7th grader. Our son is in pre-K. So comparative to some of our other, friends and community members that are, working through all of the steps of remote learning and all of that means at home, I find that the age gap is really interesting. It definitely has it's kind of like pros and cons. Like my son's day is a lot shorter, but then towards the end of my daughter's day, she's older, so she can play a game with him or kind of facilitate an activity or help out with some of the snack distribution, because snack distribution is a really high rotation part of remote learning process. So yeah, they're doing good, but their needs are different. The sort of expectations that they have from their teachers are different. So it's interesting having 2 students in very different parts of their learning experience, but all under this umbrella of how we're responding to it at home has been a challenge, but it has pros and cons for sure.
I need some mama wisdom. I have a rising 7th grader. He's a little
Okay.
He's all kind of different situations and scenarios than my 1st and 2nd grader. It's been emotional, thought it would be a little bit easier because he loves technology, has a good grasp on it, a little bit more independent, but a little moody, little testy.
Yeah.
Feeling brothers, definitely feeling the strain of not being with friends, having that, they're transitioning into being, young adults and
Right.
How has that been? Give me some advice. I need some mama advice here. How are you? And what has worked for you to kind of help her through these moments?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Coming into the spring, she was really looking forward to another sports season. She was really looking forward to doing softball. So the loss of that, and then how do you kind of make up the difference? It's okay, we have to realize that that's something you were looking forward to, and it's an area that's been really beneficial to you to be able to be on a sports team and connect with your peers through sports. So we've kind of flipped it into a little bit of father-daughter time, and bring little brother along when possible for a little bit of catch and checking in at the community garden. But yeah, just trying to really just get them outside, because I feel like they are so, that age group is so comfortable with technology that they're just okay, everything's on technology now. That's fine. I was doing so many things on technology before, and if that's where everything is now, my classes, my friends, just finding ways to like step outside of that a little bit has been an area of like focus and effort for us as a household. And then also just like paying attention to the things that I feel like my daughter's discovering a little bit on her own. Like we had a blanket that like I patched up a little like ripped piece on it, and then the next day she had the needle and thread and she was making like this art project out of needle and thread. So like it was kind of interesting to see what she was doing, but kind of similar to what Mira was saying earlier, just kind of like celebrating it maybe a step or two beyond what I would have normally done in terms of like acknowledging that activity. I think really made a difference. Like one day I think she started and it was kind of like a bird, and then like 2 days later it was like a Nike sneaker with like 6 different intricate colors, and I'm just like, this is interesting, tell me about it, let's call your grandmother, I think she'd be interested in what you're doing. So like really like, you know, pushing a few moments of celebration. And like and this is something I feel like would be a meaningful conversation for me to have with her, like now that she's kind of like been through this project, is like, you did this on your own. Like the things that they're independently doing, it's kind of remarkable to just see where like a spark of inspiration can come from. And they're at that age where that's so appropriate, you know, these like middle school years to like, you know, try new things. But when they're home, there's a little less exposure. So, you know, how can we find ways to expose them to some new things or new ideas, or when they're finding them on their own, just like really, you know, pushing. It's like, you did this is all you, and it's amazing.
Renee, I think this is a beautiful way to kind of transition to our larger conversation, because I want to talk to you about mindset and what we're seeing not only here in Massachusetts, but we're seeing nationally about a mindset that our children aren't learning right now. And they are being broken before our very eyes, and they're going to be so traumatized that you know, we're going to have a lost generation of children that aren't going to be capable of proficiency, let alone excellence. They are just, you know, having gone through this period of transition where we are having to change everything and rethink everything, that they're just lost, and that they haven't learned anything. They're not, you know, growing or challenging themselves. To me, you know, approaching this unprecedented challenge with that mindset and how we are going to recover from it, it's just the wrong mindset. You know, our children are beautiful and capable and bright, and not being learning the conventional academics, frankly, in the traditional sense, and in the status quo that I would argue that frankly does not work for a huge chunk of our children. We are
Right.
now as parents the key to their curriculum and their education in these moments. And there is opportunity for them to learn in different ways and to be exposed to different things. And they are still learning grit and resilience and problem solving and all of these other skills that we know they need to have to be successful people in this world, which is what, you know,
Right.
like you and me are most concerned about, is creating wonderful people, not just you know, graduates of the system. So how do you see that? Are you concerned about the mindset, like in some of the conversations we're starting to see emerge, that it's like this default mindset that our children, especially children like mine and yours, are broken, and there's nothing that we can do. We just have to accept, and certainly we shouldn't test them and see where they are and where they need help. Oh my gosh, they're just so broken in this moment. They're never going to be able to get back to where we want them to be. How do you see it?
Yeah, everything you're saying is a lot of what I'm hearing, very much from that like deficit mentality point of view. But I think it also kind of goes back to this like picture of like the way it should be. This like, well, you know, they should be hitting these marks and we should be doing these things. So it's really like a perception or a vision or like goals of a certain type of perfectionism that is looking to be maintained. And a quote that was shared with me, I think in the fall, that perfectionism is a figment of the colonial imagination. Quote from Christina Cleveland. So like, it's very much, you know, par for the course of the system and the way it's been historically built, that it's like, well, these are the marks and these are the measures and this is where everybody should be, and everybody should be at the same place at the same time. And like, that's just completely untrue. So there will be impact, but we don't have to assume that it's going to be a negative impact. Because in my mind, it's like, well, if they're all experiencing the same thing at the same time to some degree, then like there's going to be a certain amount of like shared experience. So let's just respond to the shared experience and support them in the way that they need, instead of just making the assumption that they're all going to be so-called left behind because like they're all in the same sort of like new challenges at the same time. It's not like, you know, half the country is in, you know, quarantine and doing remote learning and the other half of the country isn't. Like we're all doing this. So like let's all assess and let's all move forward together, and let's also be like smart about like what we're learning during this time and what tools are actually learning. Like I know like towards the end of the school year, around like late June, you know, if we've had a lot of like snow days, like some of those school days get like a little bit like sleepy and everybody's like, why are we in the building? Or sometimes it's even too hot to be in the building. Maybe some of that learning turns into remote learning in the future. It's just like there's ways that remote learning can serve us in the future. It doesn't have to be necessarily the new normal, but it can fill the gap. And I know like kids will hate me for saying it, but like I've heard other people saying like, well, maybe snow days will be more remote learning in the future, and you don't have to add it to June and like, you know, come up against July and that sort of thing. Like I do enjoy a good like family cozy snow day, so I won't push that idea too hard, but there's ideas and like processes and like creative thinking out there that has come to the surface during this that might benefit us in the future. And I really don't think the focus needs to be a deficit mentality. Like I do think it's meaningful to have an understanding of where students are at and where the gaps are, and just assess and support that accordingly.
Renee, I think this is kind of an interesting segue into some of the polling that we've done here in Massachusetts, but then of course across the country as well, by a 2-to-1 margin. Parents not really interested in returning to a status quo. They're looking for this moment to turn an unprecedented challenge into opportunity to transform. I mean, there's really no reason why we are tied to the same schedule, the same method and system of learning, which again, I would argue does not really benefit all of our children.
Right.
You know, as a country.
Because it wasn't built for the success for all children.
Not, it's built on white supremacy. And so Black and brown children,
right.
you know, are intentionally, because that's what the system's created. It's not created for our children. It's created, you know, for a certain set of children. And so by a 2-to-1 margin though, nationally, we polled American parents, they said, they're looking for change. They want something different. And frankly, I was kind of taken aback. You know, you're representing Boston here and in this conversation. Like we're sitting here together in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of surprising to me. I was looking at the comments of Boston City Councilor Anissa Asabi-George, who is the chair of the Education Committee on the Boston City Council, who is calling for schools to immediately open in the fall, by all means necessary. Of course, she does throw in the caveats, well, health experts should take a look. But, you know, we've also done some polling on that. Not only do parents not want to just shove their kids back into the status quo, they're not sure that they trust schools and school buildings to open and keep kids healthy and safe. So I want to get your take on this in particular, because where we sit in Boston, it's not that different from urban schools across the country, where you have that are falling down. You get bathrooms that aren't working. Our kids couldn't wash their hands. They can't drink from the water fountains. Buildings that should be changed, updated, consolidated to meet the needs of the community, which has changed, but we hold on to some schools, to some patterns, to some status quo because it benefits, you know, the wants of adults over the needs of children. So as we take a look at reopening, like from where you sit, I want to give you a chance to kind of speak on this, and I want to hear from your perspective. You know, we weren't doing a great job before COVID-19, just letting our kids be able to pee, for crying out loud, to wash their hands, and now we're supposed to trust these same systems to keep our kids safe from a deadly virus that they're changing every day. The information, we don't know who to trust. And I'm gonna shut up. You tell me how you see it from where you sit.
I saw that just a little bit of like those remarks kind of like come across my screen, and I was like, reopen, and I had to like double take, and it's like, are we really talking about like reopening right now? Like, we're very much in the process of, like you said, just figuring out what's going on day to day, figuring out how we want to, close out this year, figuring out what those timelines are. Is there going to be, there's a lot of questions people have of like, is there going to be anything over the summer? So for remarks and thoughts to like be very, like very much saying like, for the fall, we need to be ready to return in the fall. Like, it's almost the beginning of June. Like, the fall's going to be here in the blink of an eye. And those facilities, as you're saying, like, were not up to standard, not up to par before the pandemic. So I don't really have a sense of clarity of what's going to happen in July and August to make September go time. And that would even be like, if, like you're saying, like, even if we weren't facing this deadly disease, I still would have a lot of those questions, like, how are the bathrooms being fixed? Where are the leaky roofs being fixed? There's water and mold like accumulating under lockers and hallways, and the custodians are wiping that up every day, but it's still there every day. Like, these are things that we were talking about in February and January. So like, how does that go away? And then how are there additional measures put on top that will keep hand washing in the high rotation, re-outfitting, I'm sure, cafeteria facilities so that meal preparation and distribution can be safe. There's just so much, so many questions to be asked, and and our parents being asked the questions, and as far as we can see, that parents aren't in these conversations. So where is this coming from?
I want to ask you about this because
yeah.
We convened a group of top parent activists across the country to kind of formulate a Bill of Rights for families, really doing the work of like, let's take a look and consult with the CDC, with the EPA, with the American Academy of Pediatrics. We really dug in, like, is this intersection representative enough for folks all over the country? And then we brought it back home to Massachusetts Parents United, dug in with 100 of our top parent activists from across the state, dissecting it, making sure we got it right. And we put together this Bill of Rights. Top period is health and safety. Can you do social distancing? Explain to us very specifically, about mass distribution. How are we going to be notified if our children have been exposed to COVID-19? When a kid's got strep next to our kid in foster.
Right.
Notify us if a staff member, if an educator, if another kid suddenly develops symptoms, how quickly? What are we going to do to quarantine? Is it going to be we have very specific asks. And again, like, are you going to go to that EPA list of list N disinfectants to make sure that every night our schools, how are we going to do that to make sure that COVID-19, are we going to have staggered schedules? A lot of questions. And I got to tell you, Renee, like, when we put this thing out, and frankly fought for seats on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's return to school working group, which we had to fight for. The original list of people who were included in that conversation, there were more cops than parents in that conversation. Only 2 people of color. No representation from the special needs community, English language learner. I mean, it was disgusting and irresponsible, the group that was put together. But when we marched in there and said, we're going to take 5 or 6 seats here, we're going to get parents here from not just Boston, but every other gateway city to make sure that they've got a seat here. We've been getting pushback. These standards are too tough. How do you expect us to do this? Your kids are falling behind, as if Black, brown, low income, special needs kids, English language learners, by virtue of having been underserved, are somehow less valuable and aren't entitled to having health and safety be top priority. We just got to push them back into these buildings as quickly as possible because we've. So, I mean, I'm stunned. Like, that this is the excuse. What do you want us to do? We can't do that. Well, then you cannot open. Like,
but it's like opening for who? If parents aren't asking for it, and then like who is that for? Whose timeline is this? Is this just like so like government can look like they're serving so-called the community, like air quotes community? Like who is it for to say that like we're going to be ready in September, like no matter what? Like it just doesn't make any sense. We don't have enough evidence to even, schedule a family vacation in September. So like how are we all across the city, across the country, like going back to school? Like the logic completely doesn't add up, but the intentions seem cloudy at best. And like unfortunately, the way that you opened the conversation on the session this week, addressing the like recent news cycle and a lot of the like social and like racial unrest, and people are out risking their lives to protest in Minneapolis. And unfortunately it feels very like connected to me. Like we're seeing on a very national scale, it's very obvious that like the lives of Black and brown people don't matter. So then when that connects to our day-to-day lives and like systems like schools, for example, it's like, well, the voices of Black and brown families and parents don't matter. So we're just going to kind of do what we want to do and expect you to comply. And that narrative is really exhausting. It's very draining. I'm like managing, working on my own work and doing, showing up for Zoom calls and meetings and getting my kids into their meetings and getting their passwords and getting them prepped so that they, have their teddy bear to share for class or whatever. But like crying in between Zoom calls and trying to fix my face so I don't show up to everything with red eyes, because like this is completely overwhelming, the trauma that has to be endured day by day over and over, on top of all of the things that we have to manage during a pandemic. Like it's entirely too much, but I don't really feel like that's being accounted for. The racial trauma and the way that it impacts us as households, but also the way that that impacts our young people and their education and their self-esteem and the things that they're looking to achieve in their education. They're counted up kind of as like two different categories, like their racial trauma experience and their education experience, but the overlap is so much deeper than educators and many like white allies that need to step up and do more work are really accounting for.
Yeah, Renee, I want to dig into that, because it's, this moment is so crazy, and for families that are at intersections here, like
right,
like it's the stress of being in the middle of a pandemic. We keep saying over and over on this program that racism has not taken a break because there is a pandemic.
Right.
Not equity in remote education, just like there is not equity in standard education of any type.
Right.
Compounding trauma. I mean, some of our kids are trauma impacted. Our kids, are both hurting from a lack of exposure to the classroom, but in some ways even benefiting from arrest from having to be in a white supremacist system. I can tell you my Miles has been relieved to have not been in the classroom and not being the brownest of the boys in his class right now.
Right.
Compounding by what's happening in our nation. And it's a lot. It's an unprecedented weight to put on so many families in this moment, and to say that we're supposed to just exist, as if we're on holiday and just working from home and not going through an incredible crisis while trauma continues to compound because cops
right.
are still, and we're going to continue to weaponize 911 against Black men and all of this stuff, and have to continue to have tough conversations. And it's tough to know whether or not, is it safe in this moment, because at least our babies have to stay home and close to us, because, it's not safe. It's all of this stuff in the middle. You probably don't have any answers either in terms of how to cope with this, other than just to own it to realize it's happening. And those tears, you got to let them flow to just release some pressure valve on your soul, I would have to imagine.
Yeah, like just being okay with maybe going to a Zoom call with red eyes, being okay with like, choking through something and knowing like I might not make it through the end of this call. I might have to take off my camera and, regroup or, send an email and say like, I'll catch you next week or whatever the case may be. Like, just like self-care in all of the ways that we can think of it and like have access to it right now is really important, because I'm not necessarily getting those indicators from other communities around me. So I'm having to, interpersonally and internally just think of the best ways um, to stay grounded. It's necessary, and I hear a lot of language around like, and this is pre-pandemic and like something that's just like ongoing. Like I hear that like, need to have like hard conversations about race, and I'm like, but I think for me that's so much of like where it kind of like begins is like, for many populations and for like majority population, for white populations, like to say like hard conversations is kind of like the default, but it's like for me this is just the conversation. It's the conversation of every day I like, put my feet on the ground and step out of my house, or even at this point I'm not even stepping out of my house and it's still all there. So like if we can start to shift more from like hard conversations and more to like necessary conversations, like there's just a lack of urgency across the board of how to have thoughtful, meaningful, responsive conversations about race, how to have curriculum that is culturally inclusive, how to make sure that teacher populations are represented above student populations. Like all of those conversations are on hold right now because of the work of responding to the pandemic, but the impact on those things continues to be an issue and a reality for Black and Brown students and Black and Brown households.
Facilitating those conversations should not be put on the shoulders of, frankly, Black women.
Right.
Often, pushed to do the labor of, well, teach me how to do better, show me how.
Right.
Just that ask, I would imagine, and I am not a Black woman, so you speak to this, but I can only imagine, being asked to do that work on top of, what is already, a difficult moment for your own heart. It's got to be exhausting, like people need to too, and not expect you to show up for every hard conversation because people need to be taught how to be human beings every single day. And
yeah, it's a really exhausting challenge to balance because there's places where, I'll step into an environment or be connected to a community where I'm like, okay, if I don't bring this up, it might not come up at all. So like the balance of, okay, like let's at least acknowledge that Ahmaud Arbery is gone and that his mother's grieving him on Mother's Day while we're, doing whatever our Mother's Day thing is, like let's at least acknowledge that, Breonna Taylor was like a frontline essential worker, and like now she's gone, like shot by cops in her own bed in her own home. Like let's start there, find a way to like acknowledge it, and like here's a few ways you can acknowledge it, here's a few ways to like make sure that we're having these conversations. But at a certain point I feel like I have to put like a bit of like pause on those conversations, because it's like it takes a deal of emotional and like just a lot of like energy to engage those conversations because they're very like trauma triggering. So at a certain point I have to like pause them, and it's like, and I'm starting to say more and more explicitly, like unless like we're being paid to do this work, then we can't hold your hand through this work, because like that continues to be the cycle. It's like as a friend or as a good community member or whatever it might look like I'm coaching you through your response. But like there's plenty of places where people are coaches and they get paid for that work.
I mean, beautiful truth this morning, Renee. And there's so much more that we could talk about. Our time is kind of coming to an end here, but we just want to lift you up and say how much we appreciate you sharing your voice with us this morning. We see you, we see your work and how important it is. And we treasure School Facts Boston for trying to get information out to parents to empower them with the information they need to advocate for themselves and their families so we can have a fact-based conversation.
Right.
The ways that they marginalize and shut us down is because they reduce our experience to anecdote, and without data to we are excluded from these conversations, and that has been, the easy way to push us out. Our schools are beautiful. You know, look at them, they're covered with rainbows. They can't teach our kids how to read. And it's tough, it's terrorizing to sit in the classroom, but look how beautiful they are. How can you say that they're not learning, that this isn't a wonderful school? Well,
Right.
Data, you know, we don't have anything. And in this moment, people are taking advantage of this crisis to try to advance longstanding political agendas. And while we have to struggle with our own feelings through this, we also have to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
I'm hoping you'll leave us with a moment of why you think that's important, that we can't rest. We have to continue this fight and continue to fight for data and for information and stay connected. Could you tell us why it's important to you?
Yeah, I mean, when you say, you know, kind of like we started on this conversation a little bit, like the idea of reopening Boston schools in September, but we also know and have like heard a lot of like updates and reports and data that like majority Black and brown households are being affected by COVID. But if we also know majority Black and brown students attend the schools, like how are we just going to continue to funnel those systems into one another? Like, how do we not see that those things directly correlate? Like, I am not like a data analysis. Like, I don't read, you know, all of the newspapers across the country cover to cover, but just from like my front porch of my triple decker in Boston, like that leaves me with volumes of questions before I begin to say it's time to reopen schools. So I just hope that systems and leaders will be making thoughtful decisions based on the data and be far more inclusive of parent voice.
Well, Renee, we know you will be at that table, definitely in Boston, and we'd love to have you at our table as well, with the beautiful women who are leading the National Parents Union across the country. We see you, we're inspired by you, and we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Wonderful to be joined by our friends here in Boston. It's nice to be joined by fellow warriors across the country. Always so grateful for their time. Really, you know, it's hard conversations that we're having here, and it's heartbreaking to hear about you know, folks that are having to fight for their voices to be heard when they are closest to the pain. So again, you know, we just so appreciate Renee and her time this morning and all of her work.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If you have any feedback or tips or ideas for guests, please send them to info@npunion.org. Thanks a lot, everyone. Hope you have a great day.
Bye now.
Bye.